In our myth-busting session this month, we're going to look at the myth that most American men have been unfaithful in their marriages. And we know that Americans believe this because, well, they say it all the time, and also because in studies that have been done both by myself and my team at the Kinsey Institute and other colleagues, Americans tend to believe that to be true. In fact, Americans believe that between 50 and 80% of men have been sexually unfaithful to their wives. And as you might perhaps not be surprised, women think that a higher percentage of men have been unfaithful than men believe have been unfaithful. In the national survey that we did asking this question, 83% believed that at least 3 out of every 10 men, that is 30% of men, had had an extramarital affair, at least one. And 55% in fact, believed that at least 1 out of every 2 men had been unfaithful. And 20% believed that at least 7 out of 10, that is 70% of men, had been unfaithful to their wives. Husbands had been unfaithful to their wives. 50% more women than men believed that 7 out of 10 men had been unfaithful to their wives sometime during their marriages, at least once. So what do we know is the case in reality? That is, when you actually ask people, have you had an extramarital relationship, a sexual relationship outside your marriage? So what are the facts? Now, that's what people believe to be true, and now let's see whether it really is true or not. A 1994 study found that 23% of men and 12% of women reported that they had been involved in at least one extramarital affair. So it's quite a bit less than what Americans believe to be true. And in men over 40, approximately 30%, or 3 out of 10, reported that they had or were having sex with a partner outside of marriage. The percentage of women in that study was between 10 and 20%. Of ever divorced men, so asking people who had already been divorced, 38% reported having at least one extramarital affair. Still, less than 4 out of 10, less than the majority. While only 20% of divorced women reported having an outside sexual relationship while they were married. In another study that took place in 1991 of 2,000 plus Americans, 1/3 of married men and women said that they had had sometime during their marriages, and that's about 30, or 33 out of 100, had said that they had had an extramarital affair, at least one during the time that they were married. So it's not as many, I think, as a lot of people think. There's not as much extramarital sex going on. And again, remember, a lot of these people have had one experience and didn't like it, or felt too bad about it and never did it again. Of course, there are people who have multiple affairs, and they are a special group. Now, what do we know about extramarital affairs? Because we know something about them. People have been asked about them. First of all, we know that the average affair lasts approximately 1 year. So that's data that have been collected and from multiple surveys. And here's something very interesting, I think. When men are asked about their feelings about their mistresses and their wives, men report that they like their wives better than they like their mistresses. But when women are asked about how they feel about their lovers and their husbands, women report that they like their lovers better than they like their husbands. So that's an interesting thing. And what does that say about marriage? Interesting. Of those couples who are involved in an extramarital affair, only 17% of males in the study that asked these questions or looked at these questions, and only 10% of the females say that they are planning to leave their spouses. So people who are having extramarital affairs are not doing it on their way out. in general, because only 70% of the males and only 10% of the females, at least in a study that asked that question, said that they were planning to leave. And only 9% of the males and only 6% of the females plan to marry their present lovers. So, that myth maybe is not a myth when people say, oh, well, he's not likely to marry you if he's having an affair with you, or vice versa, because in fact, that's what people say. Another idea that people have that turns out not to be true is, I'm sure you've heard the story about the 7-year itch. That's the time when people are most vulnerable to having an affair, is somewhere around the 7th year. Well, when we look at the data, it's more like the 5 or 4-year itch. Actually, the most vulnerable period in a marriage appears to be between the 4th and 5th year, and not the 7th year. So that's the dangerous time when people are looking to feeling uncomfortable in their marriages, and we don't know exactly why that is. I can't answer why that is. Maybe it's when you've got your second kid, and and marriage is feeling rather heavy, or maybe it's at a time when people are not looking to really work on their marriages as much as they should be. Maybe that's when that really starts to come in. I don't know. But anyway, it's not the 7-year itch; it's the 4 to 5-year itch. Now, another study asked couples how important sexual exclusivity is to them. And this study was of 6,000 couples. And it turned out that the vast majority felt that sexual exclusivity should be a goal in a marriage. That is, staying faithful was very important. But there was less agreement on the consequences if one or both of the couples didn't live up to this ideal. So, for some of them, some people said it would have no effect on the marriage. But most believed that even one incident would put an end to trust, to love and commitment, and maybe even to the relationship. So for a lot of people, just even one experience of, if they found out about it, of breaking that exclusive bond would have serious effects on a marriage. Now, my feeling is that one has to look at infidelity as a symptom, and one has to then go and try to figure out what's going on and why did that happen, and work on the symptom. That the infidelity is not the disease, it's the symptom, and you've got to find out what the disease is and work on that and resolve that. But that's for another time. Husbands and wives who report extramarital sex are more likely to divorce, whether it happened at the beginning or after many years. So when you look at relationships in advance of the problem, and you know whether those marriages have had an incident of sexual infidelity, it is more likely that those marriages will break up sometime in the future than the ones in which there hasn't been an incident of sexual infidelity. And so there have been studies that have shown that. Now, is infidelity the number one cause of divorce, however? And a lot of people believe that that's true. That's another kind of a myth. And the answer to that is no, it is not. It actually is number 3. Although 54% of wives and 46% of husbands in one study say that a partner strayed when they're getting divorced, only 20% report that infidelity was the cause of their divorce. The top 2 causes, at least in this major study, was number 1 was lack of communication. And the kind of things that they didn't communicate about, the disagreements were about money, family, personal goals, and how to spend non-working hours. That is, when he's sitting in front of the TV drinking beers and watching football games all the time with his friends and not spending any time with her, or she's doing whatever she does and not spending any time with him, that's a major problem. As well as, what do you do with the money? How much time do you spend with his family or her family or the kids? These are, major problems. And that was 64% of the couple said that was the reason that they were divorcing. And the number 2 was constant fighting. I have a feeling they're constantly fighting about what they're not communicating about. That was 58%. And one of the things that I've always believed is that the best aphrodisiac is communication. And we need to do a lot more communicating and working on communicating if we're going to have good marriages. So divorce is the number 3 reason that people gave, at least in this study, and I believe that's probably where it stands as the cause. And I have a feeling, though, that really it's the lack of communication, the constant fighting that led to the infidelity. It's not really the infidelity that was the problem. I thought we might end by talking about other kinds of couples, because what about exclusivity in gay and lesbian couples? Is it the same problem that it is in heterosexual couples? Who would you guess would be more likely to stay together longer and to be the most exclusive, male couples or female couples? I think most people would think that female couples would stay together longer. So I believe that they think that probably lesbian couples are the couples that would be the most likely to have the longest relationships. Well, let's see what the data tells us. First of all, let's look at couple overall in all kinds of couples. There was a large national survey that looked at couples who were together, heterosexual couples, gay male couples, and lesbian couples. And then they looked at them 18 months later to see where they were at. And they wanted to see who were the most likely to stay together. And who were the most likely to actually fall apart. The ones that were least likely to fall apart were the heterosexual couples. They were the most likely to be together. Then came the cohabitors. That is, heterosexual couples who were living together. But they really lasted more than 10 years. So cohabitors, they either get married or they fall apart before 10 years. The next group, which turned out to stay together just about the same amount as cohabitors, were gay male couples. And the ones that were most likely to fall apart, or least likely to stay together the longest, were the lesbian couples. So it's not what we would most likely predict. The lesbian couples, and there were 69% of them were together for less than 3 years, and 24% of them were together 4 to 8 years, and only 7% of them were together 9 years or less. 9 years or more, excuse me. So the lesbian couples are the less likely to stay together a long time. Now, what percentage were reported being committed for a lifetime or longer? Or longer than a lifetime. Now, it was the 92% of the lesbian couples reported that they were committed for a lifetime. 96% of the gay couples said they were committed for a lifetime. And half of the couples had been through some kind of commitment ceremony, who were gay and lesbian. But it's interesting that more of the gay male couples said that they were committed for a lifetime or for a long time. It was lower than the 92% of lesbian couples. So the longest relationships were found among gay men couples when compared to gay men or lesbian couples, even though the lesbian couples had more agreement with regard to exclusivity. So lesbian couples were more agreed between the members of the couple that they would be exclusive, and nevertheless their relationships didn't last as long. Exclusivity was preferred by male couples, but they accepted more exceptions to the rules, and they seemed to work these things out together. Gay male couples had more sex together than lesbian couples, but lesbian couples seemed to enjoy the sex they had better than the gay male couples did. The exclusive agreement was broken approximately 4 times more often in male couples than in female couples. And long-term partners were more likely to have broken exclusivity arrangements. But interestingly, partners with children broke their exclusivity agreements less often than partners who didn't have children. So that's interesting. And it brings to mind this whole disagreement about gay marriage. Is that it would be interesting to know whether if gay couples can marry, whether they're going to be less likely to break up, since the people who break up the least are heterosexual married couples. and it may be that commitment that public commitment is very important to keeping couples together. So, the answer, I guess, to our major myth this month, which is about whether men are unfaithful or not in marriage, is that they are not nearly as unfaithful as we think they are. And so we can have a lot more confidence in them, I think, than we give them credit for.